But one of the things that he brought up, which is not unique to him, is in fact fairly common when talking to people around here, and also, honestly, when talking to all New Yorkers, which I think is a really compelling subject, is the concept of knowing neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So we brought up, well, he asked, we told him that we were, doing this walk around. He was interested enough to ask where we're staying.
Right.
And we told him the St. George area near the ferry. And he was like, oh, that's a bad neighborhood. You got to watch out for around there, you know.
And that was actually one thing that we semi-disputed because I said, oh, I like it.
Yeah. And he was like, don't go out after dark. They'll strip your bones. They'll eat you like chicken bones or something like that was what he said. And, we continued the conversation from there. And this is something that we've had happen with multiple different people in Staten Island. But as I just said, it's also something that as we've thought about it more after we departed from his presence, this is a thing that I think most New Yorkers talk about.
Yeah.
The idea of, asking what neighborhood you're from or asking what neighborhood you're going to, or any time a neighborhood comes up in general, people have an opinion as to whether it's a good neighborhood or bad neighborhood, as to whether it's a safe neighborhood or not a safe neighborhood.
Right, and they want to tell you that opinion.
And so we've started to, talk about why it is that people do that.
Mm-hmm.
And this includes friends of ours that are not people that are looking to discriminate. They're fairly progressive people.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to several different things. I think it's kind of like talking about the weather as far as New York goes. It's like talking about the trains or something like that.
Or even this is something I thought of just now. If you do live in the suburbs and it's like, oh, have you been to Trexlertown recently? They just put in this new mall and they just did this and there's a new apartment complex over there. And it's kind of just like what's happening in the neighborhood too.
Yeah. And of course, historically, in the history of the past, 50 to 70 years, all the generations that live in the city, crime was a big topic of conversation for a meaningful amount of it.
Right.
So that, I think, remains as an artifact of, New York history.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, I think there is a component where people feel like they want to offer you advice and offer you safety by communicating what a bad neighborhood is and what to watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
I think it also enables people to communicate an idea that they have knowledge of the city, which is a boost for self-esteem for somebody that's communicating that to you.
Right.
And I think finally, and most importantly for figuring it out, is that for people that particularly live in the city and grew up here, they had, as anybody has in the course of their lifetime, both trauma and a direction from adults, parents, as to how to maintain safety.
Right.
And so if you go to an area and you feel anxious or you feel unwelcome or people are making you feel unwelcome, then you internalize those things and you identify that as a bad neighborhood. And if
or at least as don't go over there, or that's a neighborhood that'll make me feel uncomfortable, and then it translates into right.
Yeah. And so the parents are telling you not to go there because they've maybe internalized something previously. Their fear for your being compromised in some way, for you being, hurt. They can't protect you personally all the time, so they want to instill something in you that will program you to not be, hurt.
Right.
And I think that the the experience that we have as children and teenagers get internalized, even if like they're not the most traumatic things. That feeling of discomfort, particularly when you're younger, goes deeper and is more set, and is less likely to be thought about later in life.
Right.
Because it might not even be a thing that I mean, for some people, you can go back and like identify a thing that was traumatic and then maybe work on it. But there might be just the act of walking down the street and feeling uncomfortable is traumatic, but in retrospect doesn't register as a traumatic event.
Right. Well, I also think, so if I think about my own experience coming into the city, I had the understanding, anytime I came into the city as a kid, I was usually with family, and it was always, don't go out of my sight, hold on to my hand, we're going to cross the street now, we're going to a show, or we're going to this restaurant, or we're doing this thing, and you're all together, and you're staying in one little area. And then when I started coming into the city as a teenager, it was usually with a class field trip or something, and it was, okay, we're going to go to this museum, and you can go off on your own, but only stay within this range. Because you have to get back on the bus or something. Like, I would never try to go on the subway or go too far because I just needed to know my directions, and I needed to get back and not miss the bus back home and get in trouble. And then when I came to move here, there was sort of this like, okay, you're going to the city, you're going into this urban environment where like there's so many people, there's so many things happening, be careful, be aware. And so I think since I've lived here, I don't necessarily distinguish between, or from the beginning I didn't necessarily distinguish between neighborhoods. I first moved here, I moved to the East Village. Like, that's not a neighborhood that maybe years ago people would say watch your back there, but within the last 15 years, that's not really a neighborhood that people would typically say, oh, that's a bad neighborhood. But I moved here from Allentown, Pennsylvania, so from the very beginning, I was always kind of aware of my surroundings and didn't necessarily know the different neighborhoods, so I'd cross one street and just like, okay, I'm still aware of my surroundings. I'm going back home, I'm still aware of my surroundings. We moved to Brooklyn, I'm like aware of I'm just like looking around, I'm taking it all in, I'm making my own decisions on what feels safe and what doesn't. Maybe I won't turn down this dark alleyway, but maybe, Whereas if you grew up here too, I would imagine it's similar to how I grew up, where it's like, okay, stay within the neighborhood because of timing, and you have to get back for dinner, and you have to do this, and this is where we know people, and if something happens, like, they'll recognize you. Mm-hmm. So it's probably a similar thing. The thing about living in a city where there are so many people, and a city like New York City, where it's segregated. So saying stay within this border, either intentionally or unintentionally, does end up translating into stay near the people that look like you. Mm-hmm. And don't go into the neighborhoods where people don't look like you.
Well, and that's specifically for white people too, because I think the inverse of this is really, when it comes down to it, it isn't communicated this way, but there aren't really any good neighborhoods for people of color. The inverse of this, which is like, if you go to a neighborhood where you are not of the same color as that neighborhood, people are going to think you're a suspect, and that's a bad neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And if you are in your own neighborhood, you are, if you look at the crime statistics, more likely to be a victim of crime than somebody that is white. Because, I don't know, I mean, who knows what the reasoning for that is, because you're in that neighborhood, or because people think that you're less likely to be believed by the police or to have your crime followed up on, who knows. But the bottom line is, like, either you're a suspect or you are a likely victim of a crime. And stay inside your boundaries, yeah, I guess it's because, if you're a person of color and you're going to a white area, it's because you could be a suspect and a victim in a different way,
Yeah, or treated poorly in some way, or, made to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like you don't belong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is stories that we've heard from people here about going to different parts in Staten Island.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. And it's not just the people that we've spoken to this month, but I think that's a pretty broadly understood idea, in popular society.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that makes this tricky is it feels like an innocuous conversation, maybe, or just something that casually is brought up, and you just move on from, and there's not really a strong language built around how to talk about the idea of somebody bringing up that an area is a bad neighborhood or not.
Right.
And without kind of halting the conversation in its tracks, you know? So we're talking to this guy that's, as far as we're concerned, I wouldn't say that I liked him or I hated him, but I was interested in kind of speaking with him for a few minutes so that I could understand the place that he's from and just get some information on what it's like to be one of these people here.
Yeah, to me he seemed like a character from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we're studying the neighborhood right now.
And then so, I think the kind of the most straightforward way to have that conversation becomes, he said, "Oh, it's a bad neighborhood." And you go, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, there's a lot of poor people and a lot of crime there." And it's like, well, why is it a problem that there's a lot of poor people there?
Yeah.
And then he has to explain why it's a problem that there's poor people there. And inevitably, either you're not really going to get him to go, "Oh, you're right. I don't know why I've ever thought that."
Yeah, or maybe you could, but it's like one person at a time. I'm even wrestling with that understanding myself. Like, we're bringing it up, we're thinking about it, but I'm also wrestling with why do I feel why do we kind of consider areas where it's not as well maintained to be more dangerous? Like, we do, I think most people do associate that with, I gotta watch my back, or I have to look out, or it's a little more chaotic here, and that's, I have to think about that myself as I walk around and wrestle with that thought, and why are those thoughts coming into my head. And I think to put someone on the spot to think about that in conversation, possibly for the first time they've ever thought about it.
Yeah. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that being in an area that is not well kept is an area that you have to be more aware of, because I think an area that is demonstrating disorder signals to anybody around it that disordered behavior is more likely and permissible. The problem for me is that people then start blaming the neighborhood and the people that are there for that. And that's not, there are forces more complicated than the people there that are causing that disorder.
Oh, of course.
So a good example is Jersey Street, which is just down the block from where we're staying right now, which we've had an interesting kind of ongoing dialogue about this past month. We've had people tell us that it's not a safe area, and in fact,
multiple people,
and in fact, one person in particular told us to stay away from that street, and then we decided, well, let's go walk it and see what it's like. And we walked it. There wasn't anything that made us feel demonstrably unsafe. But then we got home and found out that there had been a shooting just a couple of blocks from where we had been walking on Jersey Street.
Like an hour before.
No, a half hour before.
Half hour before.
And we had heard a woman tell her 2 children, get home before dark, the lights aren't working right now. And we were like, that's a little strange.
Yeah.
And it had to have been directly a consequence. We had
also seen a helicopter flying above. And
that's right.
We had kind of joked with each other, oh, I bet it's flying above Jersey Street. And it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
so obviously there's some real stuff that's happening on that street. The feeling that I get walking on that street is something that I would describe as like noise, which is to say that there's a lot of things going on at any one time, and you have to be very aware of those things. And for me, my metric for what is safe or unsafe is my comfort level being exceeded to a degree where I think I'm projecting that. You know, if I recognize that I have discomfort in me, but I can understand that it's coming from myself principally, and I can maintain that. Or it's coming from my external environment, but I feel in command enough of myself that I'm not going to project that insecurity, then it's comfortable for me. And I can recognize that that is something I can navigate. I haven't reached the level where my discomfort, or where discomfort is exceeded. And
right.
So, you know, that's where we are right now. But as far as disorder, the woman, you know, mentioned that their lights weren't working, and there are some police lights down there. And those, for those that haven't seen those ever, they are mobile lighting units, that basically lighting poles that the police set up in areas that are presumably high crime.
Look like they run on a generator or something.
Yeah, well,
they kind of like roll up.
And they make noise, and they, illuminate an area. And that, for me, is really problematic, because if it's necessary for there to be lights there, then they should build lights there. Like, the city should make it so that there's lighting there. There should not be a NYPD branded lighting system in the area, because that communicates to not only the people that live, to the people that don't live there, to the people that live there, that this is an area that needs to be controlled by the police.
Yeah.
And
that's true. It does add to that story of, oh, it's a bad neighborhood. There's always police lights there. The police are always there. And then for the people that live there, it's like, oh, cool, we're being just like watched all the time. And it makes it so that people avoid it, so that aren't from the area. So it just allows for like whatever is happening to just circle on itself.
Well, and it also, look, this isn't coming from a place of like, being naive. There are people, there are individuals that are bad, that exist in areas. And if you put a NYPD light in the middle of an area, there are people that are going to take that as like a badge of honor and pride and a distinction that this is a bad neighborhood, and they're going to start leveraging the fact that it's a bad neighborhood and start doing bad things in order to live up to that reputation and take on that attitude. So you're just enabling the problems that you are, I don't even know if you're looking to solve. You're just trying to, it's like keeping the kitchen light on so that the roaches don't come in, you know? And like the roaches are inevitably going to come in anyway. So like, figure out how to actually deal with the problem.
Yeah, it seems more like asserting some sort of power or dominance, or, pretending like, hey, look, we're here, we are going to control this situation, but like in our way that isn't really helpful.
Yeah.
But more just in a way that's like, look, we're the law and order, and we're here.
Yeah.
And we see you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
So that's our current ongoing thoughts with respect to what a bad neighborhood is.
Yeah.
Which is to say that for me, I feel like there are no bad neighborhoods. And I feel like that's the guiding principle that I want to continue to move forward with, and see how we can kind of build a further idea around that.
Yeah.